Hello, my name is Peter Lacey. I'm the Global Managing Director of Strategy and Sustainability at Accenture, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by three wonderful examples of pioneers and innovators on the circular economy, and I'll let them say a little bit more about their experience as we go through the panel. What we want to talk about today is the opportunity to advance the circular economy, to scale at speed, and in particular to celebrate innovation. Innovation in business, innovation in government, innovation in financial services, for example, and right across the spectrum, not just large multinationals, but also smaller, more entrepreneurial companies. The circular economy represents a $4.5 trillion global opportunity to 2030 to decouple our global economic system and all the good stuff that we want, prosperity, economic development, wealth creation, from harmful or wasteful use of natural resources, whether or not that's energy, whether or not that's water, whether or not that's tackling climate change, or the broader set of materials that power our global economy. And what we're focused on as a group, particularly myself, David and Ida, is some of the work that we've been doing with the World Economic Forum and the Young Global Leaders Network of the World Economic Forum to create the world's first ever Circular Economy Awards, now in its second year, and I think increasingly exciting all of us, not just with the volume of interest that it's generating, but also with the growing quality of the entries. We've just come off the back last night of celebrating the second round of winners. I'm pleased to say that Philips was one of those winners, and we'll hear a little bit more about those. We also had Aerofarms as a finalist, and we had many other extraordinary examples of how companies are creating competitive advantage, or regions are progressing things for their citizens through circular economy. So that's the backdrop to our discussion today. Let me kick off by asking our panelists, what is the circular economy in the context of your organization? Why is it important? Why don't we kick off with Philips?
Well, thank you, Peter. So for us, the circular economy became natural at a point in time. You already created the notion of the world's moving on. We need to feed many more billions, and our natural resources are still being depleted in a very linear fashion. And then, as our mission has always been for the last 125 years, to make an impact, a meaningful impact in people's lives through innovation. And we clearly set out a target to do that for 3 billion people on the planet by 2025. Things start to connect. And circular economy, circular thinking, circular strategies started to become relevant to our whole notion of how do you innovate? How do you create new value propositions end to end in all of our businesses? And that's how it became very relevant to everything we do. And currently, we have also set a target for our circular economy businesses or business activities to be doubled by 2020. So for us, it's been a clear objective, and we're starting to deliver on those ambitions, making hopefully a sensible contribution to the challenges that the world is facing.
And so congratulations last night. Philips won the multinational award. Last year won by Dell. Really it was an amazing group. We all saw the quality of the finalists, so to win that, congratulations. But sometimes I think circular economy is still quite an abstract concept for customers, for governments, for business. But can you bring it to life? Give us an example within Philips of where you think there's a tangible example that you're driving circular economy, but also business advantage.
Well, there's numerous. Let me take one from healthcare, the healthcare space. So, by and large, healthcare equipment has been, transacted to hospitals for, sold, initial investment, 10 years later taking out, replaced.
Yeah.
Over the last 20 years, we've developed approaches to closing the loop earlier. So we create contracts, alignments, partnerships with hospitals where we provide healthcare services or allow them to provide services. In the case of, for example, imaging, where we guarantee imaging and the financial model is a pay per scan.
Right.
Model.
Okay. So you never actually buy the equipment.
They don't buy the equipment. They pay for the use. And what we do is we take out the equipment in closed loops refurbish them, bring them state of the art, and re-enter them into the healthcare cycle.
And so tell me, wouldn't that kind of, I mean, one of the fears that I hear from different businesses, wouldn't that cannibalize your existing market? I mean, what are the guys who are running your existing business think of that? Does it add, do you have that challenge?
At first, yes. Right. And this is where I think the question comes in of leadership and culture change. Yeah. It won't be for long until circular economy thinking becomes business as usual. Right. I tend to believe that. So that's a leadership challenge, which we, I think, starting to deal with. It's not about that single transaction. It's about a long-term partnership with your customers, whether it is in the energy space or in the healthcare provision. It's not about that single transaction anymore. And that's indeed, that fear exists still today. And we're dealing with it, by bringing in the right examples and showing that this creates different value creation opportunities for all partners, frankly, including ourselves.
Well, you seem to be doing it better than most. Edie, when I ask you kind of what the circular economy means to you and your organisation, your role, you have a very different perspective as a former minister, as someone who represents voters and citizens. So tell us a little bit about what it means to you and what you think it means to citizens as well.
Well, you can say that my organization is all of
Denmark.
Right? My whole country, because I would like to have the whole country to be leaders in circular economy. Right. And first of all, you have to get the vision out there, get people to understand what it's about. And we started just by telling people that waste is a resource and really showing them that the things that they throw away can actually get a new life if we use it correctly. The next steps was to say, okay, why don't we actually try to design the things so that they don't end up in the things that we have to incinerate, but ends up in the other bin where it can be recycled. So that small story, I think, have been very impactful in Denmark. But then we've also had the cases of the businesses where people really understand what is circular economy. And it might be a little bit difficult, but once you get it, it's like it's changing your mind. So, for instance, I think the case of Philips and hospital equipment, to tell people, why would we want to own this as a country, or we have public health care, right? Why do we want to own the machines? We just want them to work and have the best possible machines. And it's much better for you that these machines are updated. It's cheaper in the long run because the company doesn't have to go out and buy new resources, and they take them back and recycle it. So the examples, we also have like Maersk Lines, which is one of the biggest shipping companies in the world. They built a Triple-E ship. And we had a lot of stories in Denmark about...
Is that like the Boeing 777? Is that the biggest ship?
It's the biggest ship at all. And we've had a lot of stories about all ships being beached in Bangladesh and being taken apart under terrible conditions. So people were actually aware of that ships have an afterlife. But then to tell them, you don't have to do that, because now you actually have a ship, it has a material passport, we know what it's created out of, and it actually has a high value when it's done. We can take it apart and use the things. So examples like that, that's big scale. We have small SMEs that are actually just popping up. Like we have a company called Old Bricks, and they take down old houses and take the bricks and give a lot of people a lot of work and build new buildings out of these beautiful old bricks. So these examples really, I think, is one of the strongest ways of driving this, because we can regulate, we can do public procurement, we can do programs for businesses, but really getting the idea out there as political leaders is an important thing.
I need to put the entrepreneurs, the old brick entrepreneurs, in touch with a business that I saw recently in Suzhou in China that uses 3D printing to print houses, and they can now print 6-story houses, and they use the old bricks as the ink, and they can put 60% of the ink. So lots of opportunities for small businesses, not just big businesses, which is something we've seen through the circuit.
And I met another architect who's sort of solving a problem. We have rural areas that are really falling apart, and nobody wants to tear down these houses because they have no value and the communities just break down. So this architect, he's actually taking down whole walls of these houses from the 70s, bringing them to the cities, building, and you get your house is then called Arenvej 6, which would be the old address of the street, and then you get this house in Copenhagen that was actually in a rural area. You clean that area so people want to be there again, and you bring the house back to Copenhagen. So we see all kinds of innovative thinking and people seeing all the opportunities in this area.
Good example of where there's a positive sort of collateral impact, which wasn't necessarily directly intended. It was the law of positive unintended consequences for something that's regenerating communities by thinking through the circular lens. Right?
And for me, the circular economy is really where we can solve several problems at a time.
I agree with that.
So it's really integrating all the silos that we keep having problems with, and also the big problem of rural versus urban, which is one of the biggest problems of time.
Yeah, a perennial problem. David, so maybe on that topic of entrepreneurship, that's probably a pretty seamless segue to you. New startup, tech pioneer, really driving forward with really quite extraordinary innovation in the food and agricultural value chain. Tell us about AeroFarms. Tell us what you do, and tell us what the circular economy principle is that's at the heart of your business.
So AeroFarms, our vision is to build farms in cities all over the world, enabling local food production at scale. We're a vertical farming company, meaning we grow not in greenhouses, but warehouses, without sun, without soil, using 95% less water, 50% less fertilizers, 0 pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, perfecting plant growth at each plant at a time. And at the circular economy, we're inspired, congratulations Walter, Philips, we're inspired by companies like you that are innovating not just on the technology, on business plans, and we try and incorporate circular economy thinking as part of our values, our principles, so it's alive every day in the company. So it influences strategy. And I love the way Alan Murray from Fortune communicated it last night at the Circular Gala Awards, was now we're starting to see that sort of values infiltrate the boards. And it's not just at the boards, but it's also at our everyday workers, at the whole value chain, at the customers. And it's more open communication where we're communicating what we're doing, why we're doing it, and we're seeing from an innovation standpoint, starting to whether it's the way our engineering team thinks about the mechanical structure, the way our horticulture team thinks about the biological structure, the way our sales channel thinks about the packaging and the relationships, whether it's disintermediating the supply chain for local production or just creating less waste by other means of interacting and enforcing the cold chain. But it's really throughout the organization, and we're seeing more organizations like Philips, like AeroFarms at the national level, like Denmark, really educating. And from a technology standpoint, we're Accenture's and the center of it all is data, as we've talked about.
Right.
And data informs basic understanding that enables us
Why
to
is
be
that
faster.
circular? What's the data? What's the sustainability benefit? Bring it to life and tell us how you're using data without giving away anything you shouldn't.
The more we understand plants and what they need, then we understand what they don't need. So for example, are we over-irrigating a kale plant, an arugula plant?
And wasting water in the process, wasting fertilizer, energy, right.
All of that. And also it's like, what's the optimal time to harvest at peak nutrition or peak flavor? So you could cut out a lot of waste, whether it's inputs or the output, the final product itself.
And so tell us a little bit about Philips's journey, because I think this shift towards some of these innovations like big data, better understanding, breakthroughs in kind of scientific understanding of things like food value chains, I mean, that's been a journey. Right? This is not something that necessarily has been in the business. Maybe it has. You might say at a level of principle for many years, but there's a point at which there's a point of departure where you started focusing much more on this topic as being the growth driver for Philips. What changes did you make, and what were the most significant changes and challenges that you faced?
I think you're right, and you rightfully described it, that it is no longer about the product design, the hardcore innovation, which has been part and parcel of our industries for a long time. It is the understanding and the insight that this needs to be an end-to-end, complete rethink of how we deliver services, how we deliver goods, how we interact with customers and partners. The solution to the world's most challenging problems are no longer a single company solution. It is partnership models, it's collaboration. So yes, innovating your complete design product, innovating your manufacturing processes, your supply chain processes, and frankly speaking, your service models. The creation of Philips Capital as a vehicle for us to enable public procurement to be not a single transaction, but a life cycle transaction, a different kind of partnership. was a vehicle that we needed to create in order to allow us to enter into these new service propositions, these new partnership propositions. So it is multifaceted. It's not about just the innovation of the product. Many years we thought about, green product design. Yes, 55% of our revenues is green, but it's much more now shifting to an end-to-end solution with all kinds of new capabilities as well as partnerships.
Yeah.
Can I build on that? It's like from a business model standpoint, a lot of our solutions, whether we're looking for solutions in pollution, water, water security, all of these things, there's often a capital intensity. And being smart in raising financing is often part of a business plan. So where you could partner, whether it's vendor financing or customer financing, it's another way we need to be innovative, and it's not a way where people necessarily think of innovation. The banks are starting to learn to be more aware of it and starting to innovate.
Tell us about that. I mean, because I just wanted to get onto this kind of what's different. Why is this not just business as usual in terms of the capabilities, in terms of the change? I mean, you may or may not be able to talk about them, but I know that you have some pretty impressive investors. I mean, what is the difference between the relationship that you see in some of your peers in more traditional business? Are you becoming more attractive as a tech pioneer in this space, or how do you manage that shift, and what do you expect from them? What do they expect from you?
So our financial partners, Goldman Sachs and Prudential, they are
some pretty heavy hitters, right? These are not green banks, or these are very much the mainstream of the pension industry, of the banking industry.
And they're in it to make a profit, as they should be, because that'll enable more capital to flow. They're looking at businesses like ours, understanding it's harder and more complex to understand, but they're willing to take the time, understanding there are greater benefits to the value stream, and also be leaders in finance, because they understand once they do know it, there's almost barriers to entry. It's harder for other people to be up to speed so they could get the next deal and the next deal.
Do you need anything different from them than a normal investor? Or is it just a standard relationship?
We need smarts. We need smarts. We need time. People need to. This is
patient capital.
Not necessarily patient capital, but just people to take the time to understand aerofarms, to understand vertical farming. It's anytime there's a new industry, if a banker can do a deal that's already, like there are 50 like it that have already been executed, or a new deal,
they've got a template, they've got an understanding of how to do it.
They only have so much time to spend on it, so now they're willing to spend the time to get to know us, to understand the economics work, just get to know us. And here, a company like Philips could provide vendor finance because they understand the technology risk. So it's often...
So let me just move on to... So it's one of the changes, I think we've talked about the business, we've talked about the entrepreneurial context and investors, but so for example, just to bridge to I think what's an interesting topic is, you've also received a huge amount of support from the local mayor in New Jersey, because you've been able to regenerate a community, you've been able to create a new business, and there's been some useful incentives for you to set up. I mean, how do you, as a public policymaker, without distorting markets, without kind of picking winners, which is always a danger, how do you create some of the right incentives, and what do you need from entrepreneurs? What do you do to build that kind of enabling ecosystem around them in cities, in places like Denmark?
So, for instance, we do have a program. We don't pick winners, but we might be picking challenges, because we have to say, as a small country like Denmark, we cannot go for any area. We would have to say we have some strong points.
Yeah.
And, just saying that circular economy we want that to be one of our strong points. We can then we've created a task force in the Ministry for Business that actually help SMEs think in this way, because sometimes SMEs don't have the time to think about, could I change my business model? So we've had advisors. They've had regulatory barriers standing in the way for recycling, for instance, plastics. Like we had security standards for street signs that had to be a certain white. And why? I mean, if you could change it just a little bit and then use recycled plastic. So we had that conversation with the plastics industry, change that regulation.
Right. So that's something you can do. You can step in where there's market failure.
And we have small, grants or things that can help people do the innovation, like we have in any other green technology area. We would say if you're working with that. But for me, it's also really about getting people on board. So this doesn't become like something we just talk about. And I think people are ready to this change in consumption.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it for moral reasons. They're not going to do it to be better. They might want to do it, but in the end, they will buy what is easiest and cheapest. We all are like that most of the time. At least the data shows that's how we are. We might say something different like that. So actually giving people better opportunities to make better choices.
Yeah.
It's a little bit choice design, but it's also something that they want to do.
Yeah.
So if we can actually make it legal to use services like Uber in our cities,
Yeah.
but regulated so that the drivers don't get worse off with payment and all kinds of social security. If we can, offer people, just talk to them about, why do you want a car number 2 or 3 if you can actually have mobility in these new ways. Just talk to them about what they're doing when they're no longer buying CDs and movies, they're buying a service.
Yeah.
So getting this whole idea that the consumer doesn't have to own all of this
Yeah.
stuff. And I think the modern consumer is going somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's no longer, if you see like the American cities that are driving a lot, San Francisco, and it's no longer status to own a car.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have to show off in your big car. It's status to have fast and easy, and I can just go wherever. It's much easier. Why should I actually want to own this big thing that's just standing there most of the
Right,
time?
and we see a generational shift there. I
losing
think the
value.
millennials are less concerned about that sort of more traditional, old school version of needing to own things. I mean, that's what we see in some of the data. I don't think you can say that there has been yet a complete transformation, and people do buy things for things beyond just the efficacy. They buy them for identity and their own personal. So there's lots of different levers that you need to pull to.
And maybe to jump from the small scale to the large scale, we've had a long discussion in the environmental field about consumption. And we would have like the developing countries versus developed countries saying, you have to come down in consumption or you cannot come up to our level and we're all, really bad off.
Yeah.
So this changes it, because if we can find consumption models that are actually sustainable because we share the same materials, we use them again and again, we will get beyond this old gap that's kept us apart for so many years. And I stood in the way for climate agreements like COP21. I think these new models are actually also helping the larger political level and this big old fight between developed and developing
new
world.
things
There's
opening up.
room for all of us.
I agree. Maybe I can jump on this, Peter. So
Please.
I think there's 2 accelerating big things which have come to us, late last year, COP21. Hopefully you notice it as well. It will give us an accelerating effect and interest from institutional investors, for example, for these types of models. The circular economy package that the EU Commission has now adopted.
Yep.
Because frankly speaking, Europe will never be leading in resources. We won't have, resource will be always an issue, whether it is energy or any other resources here. So it could be a driver for innovation. And what I'm still seeing, and this is maybe an area that you could very much help, is there is still regulation that doesn't allow us to take equipment, for example, for refurbishment from country to country.
Right.
Or waste from country to country.
Cross-border flows of resources.
And then you have data flows which are going to be critical for us to allow us to manage, energy consumption across different cities.
Yeah.
LA will be the first city in the world now that half of their light poles, street light poles, 110,000 light poles, that will be connected and can be managed centrally for lowering their energy consumption. It could go up to 50-55%. I mean, that is the type of innovation that through these 2, I think, major decisions that the world has come to.
Maybe even a
last year.
third, the SDGs as well, right?
Well, the
By
SDGs
2030.
obviously,
It's almost a hat trick.
SDG 12 is going to be a driver for some of the innovation that we are.
I think where you're absolutely right, and I think there's plenty of reasons to believe that as a global economy and even as a business community, we're way off, still what we need to do. I think to kind of meet a lot of these goals that we need. But it is clear to me that last year, the world made some big decisions. Right? Now, we now have to deliver on those, but the SDGs to 2030 and what those mean, COP21 and 190 plus countries signing up to keep warming significantly under 2 degrees, and then also things like the waste package, those are big stakes in the ground that start to create a new market context, I hope and think, and I think we sort of see some innovation. Let me ask, maybe this is a good one for the 2 of you. One of the things we heard quite often, for example, when we put the book together, but also I think we've heard this in some of the interviews, is that there are some barriers, for example, like public procurement. Right? So, for example, looking at the ability for procurement managers to assess the cost over a life cycle rather than at the point of purchase, which can be real challenges. I mean, is that something that you see? We've heard quite a few companies selling quite, particularly relatively expensive assets with long life cycles that have quite different performance dynamics over the course of their life cycle. Are you seeing some of that?
Absolutely. Traditionally, it comes back to our linear history. It was always about lowest initial cost.
Yeah.
Now, look at our street lights out there. If you just put LEDs in, like you do in your installations, if you just put LEDs in, you could already save up to 40-60% of the energy bill. If you then put connected lighting solutions in, you could save up to 80%. Yeah. But that installation first is way more expensive than a traditional lighting solution in any public area. So how do we get over that hump is by looking at the total life cycle cost of that installation with the energy consumption, et cetera, associated to it. But that requires public procurement rules to change. Yeah. And that's where we need to put different incentives in the public procurement guidelines in place.
And seriously, that's where the circular economy becomes very interesting, because suddenly this is something we've said for years and years, us working with green stuff, and nobody really listened. Or for me as Minister for Environment, the Minister of Finance would
I was
never
going to
listen.
say, is there a tension between different parts
Always,
of
you guys,
government on
you
this
should
topic?
know that government, most of the time you're just focused on your own government getting things through,
Right,
So you look at those stupid politicians, why don't they just? And then they're actually struggling with all these other,
You're managing the matrix just like we are in organisations.
So, but the circular economy has been that lever that sort of could make us break through to the Ministry of Finance that are actually making many of these decisions, having big companies to reference to say this is something they're doing, to have the first examples of total cost of ownership being used in utilities, for instance. Yeah. Well, we just did a whole new regulation of our water sector, the water utilities, and they're still public, or they still have to live up to a lot of regulation. But we installed total cost of ownership as a principle. Yeah. We allowed them to actually have higher water prices for the consumers if they could show that on the long run they would get lower prices by investing, by developing new technologies. So we have a very innovative sector. They have a problem like extra strovit, which is phosphorus, coming out of cleaning water, and it's clogged. It's like destroying all their equipment. So they found out to get it out of and now they can sell it for the farmers as brilliant fertilizer. So that's a really good example of a public sector, because they got the right framework to be innovative and use the resources much smarter.
Well, we started this, bridging into it from AeroFarms and your work, for example, in New Jersey and the public-private relationship there. I mean, do you have examples and do you have advice for entrepreneurs who are looking to set up in particular regions? What does it take to be a good entrepreneur that has a value proposition to a city, a government, a region, or whatever?
Well, this is both to the entrepreneur and also to the government and our political leaders in general. I love what's being talked about. So it's about setting standards and increasing standards of performance. So government should be performance-based and should constantly raise those standards, whether it's total life ownership, whether it's reducing waste, reducing pollution. In our case, it could be increasing nutritional density per caloric intake. Not to get too technical, but too many people think about calories in purchasing instead of nutrition. But whatever the performance metric, and then the best way to enact change is through the purchasing power, the massive purchasing power of governments, where they could be prescriptive and they could say, okay, and drive innovation. Right? They could choose different players. Government shouldn't necessarily, but purchasing power, the people with the power of the dollar making the choices, can be. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, we need to communicate what pain we're solving. It's good if we understand from government what pain they want to solve.
So, for example, in your case, local jobs and regenerating a locally, relatively run-down area with high-value jobs. Is that one of the examples?
Exactly. So we're in Newark, New Jersey, which is a wonderful city, but it's also had some economic troubles. So here, policymakers signal, we want construction, we want business to focus on these areas. We also have food deserts. There aren't enough areas where people can get food, access to fresh food in these cities, so focus there. And if you do, here are incentives for that job creation, for alleviating those food deserts, for sustainable or circular businesses, and that the private sector, it could fill gaps where there's otherwise the free markets don't go, and the private sector has that extra incentive to push innovation and to fill that gap.
So we're going to play a little game. It's called One Sentence Only. I'm going to ask you a string of fast fire questions, but you're only allowed one sentence each. Starting with David, what does all of you, what does the customer get out of this? Your
Good.
customer.
Confidence in their suppliers, that we're thinking about the right values as we build our business.
Better,
Citizen, I guess, in your case, but what do they get out of this?
better opportunities that their kids are not paying for in the long run.
Okay.
An opportunity to focus on what they are really asked to do, providing healthcare with best outcomes, or sustainable cities, things like that.
The biggest innovation in your business? The real core of the innovation?
Managing biology in the sense of how do we take a seed, the same seed that would otherwise be grown in the field, and give it what it wants, when it wants it, how it wants it, to deliver the best product for the customer.
The biggest policy or public innovation that you were proud of?
The European package for circular economy.
And why?
Because this one is addressing all the questions that we talked about. For instance, creating a market for secondary materials, trying to look at waste as a resource. So it's not about only ensuring that it doesn't end up in landfills in the other countries where it's cheaper, but it's actually about moving resources around and protecting them. Because it's going to set standard for product policies. They're also going to look at repairability, to how much of their products can be recycled.
Starts to make the market, basically.
Yeah, it's creating the market, and it's moved from the Commissioner for Environment, who was a brilliant guy who thought many of these things, to actually the two vice presidents of the Commission within this last year. So we had a chat here, and we've been working a year with the two vice presidents, Timmermans and Katainen, and they've really taken it on because they see this as a positive project.
Well, Yanis
for
Potocnik,
Europe.
the first of those, he was our winner last
Yeah,
year,
he's
so
a
maybe we've got a chance for Timmermans to be a future winner.
Yeah,
if
Timmermans
he
and
keeps
Katainen
going, huh?
last year, next year, because the package just came out in December. So the
But now they
voting
need to
was
deliver
over.
it, and then we'll give them the
And
prize.
we ran the risk of that being only a recycling package.
Yeah, we
No,
ran
That was the risk.
The big issue still, in my view, just to be honest, is that although I'm very positive about the circular economy initiative of the EU, that I would still regard it as a one-dimensional part of a four-dimensional puzzle in terms of the way we think about decoupling growth from natural resource use. So I think it's very strong on the rethinking of waste and recycling, not yet on the utilisation of existing assets, product life extension, and some of the other areas. So I think it's a good start, but more
the
to
key
do.
components are in the package. They're not, regulatory, we're going to do this, but all the building blocks are there. So we have the perfect tool to start working
start.
from now on.
Yeah, good start. Key innovation in your business. What is the essence of the innovation?
I think I would like to mention two things. I know you would like that. Data. Data is a key enabler, I think, for all businesses transitioning to a circular economy strategy. And secondly, innovative partnerships.
Yeah.
They will make things happen beyond what we thought possible.
Right, well, that's very good. The partnerships, I think, is extremely important. Let me ask you a final question. So you've had a chance to see the finalists, you've had a chance last night to see the winners from the Circular Economy Awards, and from your own experience, one single nugget, one single piece of advice that you would give to companies or governments or cities at an earlier stage of thinking about this that would help them to quickly accelerate to speed at scale the circular economy? David?
Introduce the ideas, make it thrive from the values, from the principles, so it lives every day in the organization.
Close to that, get the vision out there and get the people in the partnerships on board. Talk to the people, the business communities, the local communities, the organizations around this vision. How do we do this? Ask questions, don't give answers.
Embrace disruption. It's fun. Very much.
That's a great place to finish. Embrace disruption, it's fun. Listen, let me thank very much David, Ida, Walter, for your insights. I think embracing disruption, it's fun, is an extremely poignant place to finish this. As we finish the Circular Economy Awards yesterday, as we start the World Economic Forum Davos 2016 today on the topic of the fourth industrial revolution, where we're seeing extraordinary disruption taking place in the way that we organize our global economic systems, where we're seeing technologies make enormous advances. And for me, and I'm sure for all of us, that we see circular economy as a core central part of successfully achieving the benefits both for industry and for society, of the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you get something to take away that helps you on your journey towards a successful circular economy.